Morning, everybody. We'll just give people a moment as they come through from the waiting room or cyberspace, whatever you want to call it, to join us today. Lovely to see you all on this very rainy day in London, anyway. Super. Still got a few people coming through. So we'll just give that little bit moment more. Amazing. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today for our Women's Sport Trust webinar. I'm Tammy, Chief Exec of the Women's Sport Trust, and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes. WST is a charity founded over a decade ago, and our mission was fairly simple: do what we could to encourage the industry and society to value women's sport. This visibility research is part of that mission. We believe that by monitoring the landscape, demonstrating the opportunity, and understanding the barriers, that a small charity can create significant change. Most, if not all of you, work in the sports industry, and we all have a part to play to shift the dial. Every action that each of us make is part of this overall momentum. So before I hand over to others to present, I'd just like to ask two things of you. Firstly, please support us. We're a charity trying to help and need your help to do that effectively. How? Well, engage with us, share your insight and obstacles, shout about how we're helping you so we can use that to demonstrate impact to funders. And fund us if you can. We're very open to partnerships that can create impact. Secondly, ask yourself what's the lasting impact that you want to have on the sports industry and why, both personally and professionally. Knowing those drivers will dictate your actions. So it's an important one to reflect on from time to time. Women's sport isn't just a trend, it has so much more potential to unleash. And for the next hour, we'll give you a snapshot of where we're at the moment. Emma and Shalina from Future Sport and Entertainment are here to present the latest Women's Sport Trust report into women's sport visibility. And we'll then hear from Biz Bond, a data analyst from the BBC. She'll be sharing the results of their next wave of research into fandom. Now, you can download both decks from the Women's Sport Trust website, and I'll post a link for that shortly. It's a lot to get through, so I'm not sure how much time we'll have at the end for questions, but please post them, and if we can, we'll get to them at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to hand to Shalina.
Thanks, Tammy. So for those that have joined a webinar before, you'll recognise this slide, but for those that haven't, just a quick definitions. So throughout the report, we've got some terms: women's sport, mixed sport, men's sport. And we just want to take a quick second to define those. So women's and men's sports are ones where we can easily split out the different properties in terms of the data. So things like women's cricket, men's football, etc. And then mixed sport in the middle there is ones where it's a bit more difficult. So things like the tennis tournament, and then for the purpose of this report, things like the Athletic World Championships. So to start, we're just going to take a look at the year so far from January to October 22nd. And just looking on an overall reach basis in terms of women's sport viewers this year so far, we're just over 36 million. As you can see, that's just below the peaks there of 2019 and then 2022. Obviously, the Women's World Cup this summer made up a large chunk of the viewers here for 2023, but it wasn't quite as many viewers reached as the previous edition in 2019. Or the home Euros win last year. Obviously, those were both played in Europe, whereas this year's tournament was in New Zealand and Australia. So that time difference just meant that we weren't able to reach quite as many viewers this year as we were in previous editions. However, when you take that same time frame and then switch to look at different metrics, so this is average viewing time per women's sport viewer, you can see that 2023 is clearly on top, with almost 2 hours longer viewed than what we had for same period in 2022, so almost 10 hours there. And I guess in this metric here, it's really positive to see how much it's actually grown since 2019. I guess previously that was always kind of the pinnacle in terms of women's sport viewership because of that Women's World Cup in France. But here you can see that it's almost double the amount of time actually engaging with women's sport in 2023 compared to 2019. So there, I guess, is a really positive stat to show that we're not just reaching people, but they're actually much more engaged now than they were in the previous few years. And then for the next section, we're going to take a look at the Solheim Cup. So just looking back over the last few editions of it, this year's tournament, as you can see, was the most covered and the most viewed, with a number of viewers reached just below that of 2019 for reach. So reaching slightly fewer people, but in terms of engagement, again, people really tuning in to the Solheim Cup. And then for the last few editions, there's also been BBC highlights, and we'll come across to that in a little bit. So just sticking on the live content for now, and looking at the average live audience by year, again, you can see that 2023 is the highest, so 263,000 average there across the tournament. And then obviously since 2015, it's been on a really clear upward trend. So that's obviously positive to see. But looking at the right-hand side, I guess as you'd expect, day 3 of tournaments is often the most watched. So taking the top 5, and previous 3 editions had day 3 as the top, but then the other 2 days of the 2023 tournament made it into the top 5. So again, kind of a clear push towards more people watching the Solheim Cup this year across the 3 days, rather than just tuning in for the final day like they may have done in previous years. And then switching to the BBC highlights, they performed significantly better this year, given the primetime evening slot. So they aired on BBC 2 or BBC 4 at 7 p.m. Whereas when we look at the previous tournaments edition in 2021, you can see the average audiences there in the middle are much lower, but that was because the show didn't start until midnight or later for all instances. So there's obviously going to be way fewer people watching TV at that time. And then comparing it to 2019, it's fairly stable, if not very slightly down on the numbers we saw for that edition. But I guess knowing that the live content has then gone up significantly from that time, I guess it's kind of a bit of a look at people moving away from just watching the free-to-air highlights that maybe is how they got brought into the Solheim Cup previously, but are now moving towards Sky and watching the live content as well as the highlights potentially. And then looking at the demographics, and we wanted to compare this edition of Solheim Cup to the Ryder Cup that happened this year as well. So I guess firstly, in terms of the metrics of the different demographics, I guess it might be somewhat what you would expect in terms of the golf viewership is a little more upmarket, more male and a bit older. However, it gets quite interesting when you look at the difference between live and highlights for both of the tournaments. So you can see there that the female proportion of viewership for highlights is significantly higher than it is for the live content, and that's for both Solheim Cup and the Ryder Cup. So clearly it's on free to air and that has a bit more of a female skew, but there are more females interested in the highlights content and viewing that. So potentially a kind of entry way into watching this sort of content that then they might go on to watch the live content at a later edition. And then sticking with the Solheim Cup and the Ryder Cup, we just wanted to look at the overlap between the two viewers. So are there groups of people that are just interested in golf and watching both, or is there kind of a core group of people that are only interested in the women's side of it? So taking the 3-minute reach for both of those tournaments, you can see that in the middle there, that 2.3 million is the amount of people that had watched both the Solheim Cup and the Ryder Cup for the editions this year. And then on the bottom, if we just take the group that watched the Solheim Cup but didn't watch any of the Ryder Cup, that's 1.1 million viewers there, which equates to a third of the total viewers of the Solheim Cup. We wanted to, I guess, look at the engagement levels of these 3 different groups. So on the right-hand side, we've got the number of occasions viewed. So we've got the people that just watch the Cup entirely. We've got people that watch both of those competitions, and then people that only watch the Solheim Cup. And so you can see that in terms of the group that only watched the Solheim Cup, they're much more casual. So they only watched, well, almost all of them, 82% only watched on one occasion. So they kind of watched one aspect of it, either the live or the highlights, and then that was it. Whereas some of those other groups, which maybe are a little bit more avid, particularly those kind of watching the Solheim Cup and the Ryder Cup, less than half of that group watched on one occasion. So they were much more likely to have watched 3 or more programs of the golf there. So I guess it's kind of an interesting look at potentially a new group interested in watching women's golf, and potentially might have been brought in from the highlights and could then be converted into more fans and potentially watching on pay TV at a later date. And then I guess we wanted to benchmark the Solheim Cup audiences against other properties on pay TV. So taking the average live audience for a game, so as I said, for the Solheim Cup, 263,000, and then comparing that across different women's sport properties on pay TV, with I guess the majority of these airing on Sky Sports, with the Tour de France Femmes on Eurosport. But you can see there that the Solheim Cup is significantly the highest, which is really positive to see. And even out of this proportion of viewers, you can see that it's actually kind of quite a varied mix. So there's obviously the golf there, but then there's also quite a lot of cricket. And then obviously the Barclays Women's Super League is in there as well. But I guess it's positive to see that it's not solely focused on football, that I guess we might have seen in some previous editions when we've done similar reports like this. Whereas potentially women's sport viewership is becoming a little bit more varied across some of the other properties as well. And then again, similar concept here, but with the highlights instead. So looking at the free-to-air highlights for the Solheim Cup and then comparing that against other properties that have free-to-air highlights. And so here again, a fairly positive story. So that 316,000, which was the average audience on the free-to-air highlights for the Solheim Cup, is kind of in line with quite a few men's properties as well as some women's cricket that gets free-to-air highlights. Obviously, you can see that kind of the top end there with Match of the Day and Formula One and men's Test cricket being particularly high. But yeah, there's some positive stories there for the Solheim Cup, and that it's really benchmarking against some other significant men's properties. And then just looking again at most watched pay TV moments so far, and kind of going along with the idea that women's sport viewership is becoming a little more varied. So we had a look at the top 10 most watched individual broadcasts of women's sport on pay TV by the peak audience. And so you can see here that Solheim Cup features twice there in that top 10, but it's really cricket that I guess that's dominating that top 10 with the majority of it, and then only one Barclays WSL broadcast in there. So again, kind of people tuning in more to other women's sport properties that are on TV, while obviously still the Women's Super League being particularly popular and still making it into the top 10. And then we're now going to switch and look at cricket. So to start, we're going to take a look back at England women over the summer. And I guess as you might have seen already, there was obviously a lot of positive news that came out of the summer. So overall, lots of records broken, but it was by far the most watched women's test ever this past summer. The most watched 3 bilateral women's ODIs were also from this summer. And then looking at the IT20s, the second and third most watched ones on Sky that we've seen on record were also from this summer. So overall, really positive growth for women's cricket. When we look at that, I guess on a more overall level, you can see that there were 7.4 million people reached for women's cricket in 2023 so far. And that's across all formats and all types of content, so live and the free-to-air highlights that cricket receives. I guess what's really positive to see here, it's obviously been on an upward trend generally since 2017. But I guess when you look at some of those years in between where it has gone up, it's been sort of quite small incremental increases, whereas this year had a clear kind of growth spurt from the previous summer, so about 1.3 million more viewers this year in 2023, and kind of a clear jump up in terms of people tuning in to watch women's cricket this summer. So then just focusing in a little bit on the different formats. So I guess firstly starting with the test, which I think was kind of widely reported to be particularly positive in terms of viewer statistics, but there you can really see that in terms of the average audience, much more people were tuning into the test this year than ever before. Same with the ODIs. And then I guess with the IT20s, it's an interesting story in that I guess it's slightly down, but relatively stable compared to the previous few seasons. When you actually dig into that a little bit deeper, there's kind of still some positive stories there. So in terms of engagement and looking just at people that watched on Sky, so kind of removing anybody that would have just watched on free-to-air and focusing more on the pay TV side of it, you can see that the average audience for 2023 actually went up, so 178,000 compared to previous years. And I guess particularly positive when you look at the growth in just the last few years, like from 2020 and 2021 to the average audience now in 2023, there's actually a clear increase in people watching on Sky Sports and paying for that content, which is particularly positive to see, I guess, given that, as Tammy mentioned, the Women's Sport Trust is looking at kind of visibility and viability, and that's obviously a clear way to push that forward for women's sport. And then again, just looking at an engagement metric, so it wasn't just kind of average audience and viewing hours that did really well for cricket. There was much more engagement as well. So on the left-hand side, we've taken the number of occasions watched for England women this summer by live and free-to-air highlights, so across all the content. And that purple bar there is showing that a higher proportion of people this past summer were watching on 5 or more occasions. So kind of a clear interest in people watching repeatedly rather than potentially just tuning in for one program for a little bit and then that being the only women's cricket they watch this summer. And again, kind of similarly, that proportion of people watching for 5 or more occasions has been steadily increasing across this period as well. And then on the right-hand side, just looking at the average viewing time for England women's content by season. And so again, positive news for 2023 in that it's the highest that we've seen across this 5-year period. And again, significantly higher than what we saw in 2022. So people watching on average for 35 minutes longer. And that's kind of despite the number of matches being played over the last 2 years being the exact same. So yeah, really positive there to see that people are tuning in more and actually watching for longer and engaging with the content more on TV. And then again, kind of benchmarking where that stands with other properties. So looking at the top 10 most watched women's sport properties on pay TV sports channel by total viewing hours. So this is looking at an overall level rather than just looking at kind of the average audience per a game like we did previously. But again, you can kind of see that cricket is pretty dominant there. So featuring heavily in the top 10 and accounting for 56% of the total women's sport on pay TV. So yeah, I guess kind of to the point around women's sport viewership becoming more varied, and I guess particularly on pay TV channels, there's a lot of content available. So it's positive to see that that viewership is kind of being spread across different properties, but it's not kind of taking away from other ones. It's actually increasing as well. So overall, some really positive stats so far this year. And then I will hand over to Emma now to continue with cricket and discuss the 100.
Thanks, Shalina. Yes, so as Shalina says, we're going to stick on cricket just a little bit longer, but move on to the domestic side of things and the Women's 100 that took place this year, which was the third edition of it, having started back in 2021. Now, before we dig into some of the numbers on the TV audience side, we just wanted to highlight quite a key scheduling change that happened this year compared to the previous 2 editions. And that was the fact that this year's Women's 100 didn't have an evening time slot. So the previous 2 years, the opening game for both editions took place in that evening time slot on BBC, whereas that didn't actually happen this year. And we just wanted to call that out quite early on because it's quite an important scheduling change, knowing that typically, and as you'd expect, audiences are generally higher in the evening because just more people at home in that kind of prime time slot. So quite a key change that has had quite a big impact on, in some cases anyway, on the audiences. So something we just wanted to call out quite early on. So digging into those specific numbers now, this is just looking at the average audience by game for the Women's 100 this year, comparing to the previous 2 editions. So first of all, on the left-hand side, you can really see the impact of that change in time slot. Back in 2021, the Women's 100 opener got over 1 million average audience, going down to around kind of 700K last year, and then jumping down again to around 500,000 average audience for this year. So you can kind of really see in part a driving factor there is that switch from being in the evening, the opener, the last 2 years, to then switching to the afternoon. Having said that, looking across the board at the Women's 100 this year, the numbers are fairly flat or fairly consistent comparing to last year's edition, albeit not quite reaching the same heights as 2021. Important thing to note for this year's tournament, a lot of you might remember, August was quite a wet month, unexpectedly wet. So unfortunately, that meant that there was quite a lot of rain that hampered some of the games and the audiences for the Women's 100 this year, more than we'd seen for the previous 2 editions. So we just called out at the bottom kind of the impact of that rain with, we had 5 games fully abandoned, so no result happened. But not just that, we also had some games that were rain affected despite getting that result. So that might be that they were shortened or there was some rain delays, and even without, although they did get a result, that does still have an impact on audiences. So a few factors that play there with the kind of lack of evening slot and the rain that did somewhat hamper the audiences that we saw for the Women's 100 this year. Having said that, though, there are still some really positive stories that we wanted to share from the tournament this year. And one of them is this right here, which is the kind of the frequency and the engagement of viewing for the Women's 100 this year. So these kind of bar charts here look at the viewing occasions, or frequency of viewing is what we sometimes call it, for each of the 3 different Women's 100 so far. And you can see that just over 50% or half of Women's 100 viewers this year watched coverage live on linear TV on more than one occasion. And that's actually a slight increase on what we saw back in 21 and 22. So while some of those kind of standard audience metrics and the kind of number of people that are being reached is fairly flat year on year, actually it's really great that of those people are actually tuning in more regularly and they're a more engaged audience. So I'd say that that's still a really positive to come out of this year's tournament. And another positive that we wanted to share was the audiences that came to the Sky exclusive women's matches. So this chart here just looks at or breaks down both the men's and the women's 100 by the Sky exclusive games and the BBC matches. And you can see that across all of the metrics for 2023, the standout figure is very much that Sky exclusive women's 100 figure. 134,000 average audience for this year is a record high, or a 3-year high, for that particular metric. And I think what makes that even more a more positive story is that actually when you look at the men's side, that Sky exclusive number didn't actually see quite the same pattern. So it's slightly up on last year, but didn't reach the same heights as 2021. So really just highlights that that's not a kind of overall 100 trend that we saw this year, but actually it's quite a specific women's 100 on Sky trend. And that's also against the backdrop of actually the BBC numbers for the women kind of not hitting the same heights as we saw in the previous 2 years. And like I mentioned previously, that was largely driven in some way by the lack of evening slot and also the rain. So yeah, it's great to still be able to report on a kind of a real growth story for the Sky exclusive numbers for the women this year. And sticking on that point, we wanted to dig a bit deeper into what were the driving factors for that Sky audience figure. So this is just looking at the one scheduling impact being the weekday, so the average audience by weekday for the Women's 100, both across Sky and BBC. But if we just focus on Sky on the left-hand side, you can really see that the games early on in the week really do form the best in terms of average audience. So the kind of Mondays and the Tuesdays that are reaching the most amount of viewers, and then it kind of gradually goes down as the week goes on. And a big reason for that, I'm sure you could all guess, is just the amount of clashes with other sport that take place. Naturally, just the kind of sporting week, there's a lot more sport going on later in the week and the weekend. So there's much more of a kind of free window for the Women's 100 to take place early in the week. And that, of course, has an impact on the audiences, which you can really quite clearly see here. And another quite easy way, or good way for us to kind of show that to you all, is the likelihood of Women's 100 games to be able to air on Sky Sports main event, in addition to quite often Sky Sports Cricket and sometimes Sky Sports Mix as well. And you can see that Women's 100 games are much more likely to get that simulcast on main event earlier in the week than later as the week goes on and into the weekend. Big reason for that is, of course, kind of high profile sports properties like Formula One and Premier League quite often get that kind of main event slot later in the week. So really just highlights that there's kind of two things at play there. That there's the kind of clashes that kind of gradually become more present as the week goes on, and in turn the Women's 100 often doesn't get that simulcast. So clearly highlighting that kind of that clean air early in the week really does help audiences for this particular property. And sticking on the scheduling for the Women's 100, if any of you have joined this webinar before, I'm pretty sure we've shown something like this kind of spider diagram for the Women's 100. There's a few things going on, so I'll talk through it, but we do think it's quite a good way of just highlighting some of the kind of key different audience drivers for this property, or any property really. So the kind of first phase of this is just splitting out the Sky and BBC coverage with just the Sky only coverage. And as I shared before, and as you'd expect, the kind of BBC numbers are naturally high just by being on that free-to-air channel. But if we just focus on the kind of second layer of the BBC now, we've also just broken it down by those games that were the opener or the final, comparing to all the other BBC games that weren't at the start, at the very end of the tournament. And you can see that even without that evening time slot that I mentioned earlier, actually the numbers for the opener and the final do see an increase in terms of average audience, 67% higher than all the kind of non-opener and final matches. So as I say, even without that evening time slot, there is a kind of boost in invested interest at the kind of start and very end of the tournament. And then on the right-hand side, if we look at the kind of extra Sky layer, what we've broken that down into is those games that clashed with the men's 100 versus those that didn't clash with the men's 100. And that's been a more important point than ever this year, just because of the fact that the 100 took place in a slightly more condensed window this year, so a bit shorter time period than what we've seen previously. And what that meant was that there was an increase in the number of double header days. And I will explain what that means. What I mean by that is that there was an increase in the amount of days where there was 400 matches taking place this year versus previously. So when that happens, there's 2 women's and 2 men's. And in that case, the second women's game in the afternoon clashes with the first men's game. So there's that direct clash with properties across the men's and the women's. And you can really see in the slide here the impact that has on the audiences. So those games that didn't clash with the men's 100 received an average audience over 3.5 times higher than those games that did. So really just shows that's quite a sizable impact on the audiences there. And while that's of course a negative impact, that the kind of clash does have that effect, I think that kind of backdrop really goes to highlight how positive that kind of Sky exclusive record for this year really is, if we're saying that that's in spite of the fact that we've seen more of these men's 100 clashes. And for me, really just makes me think how much higher could it have been if we hadn't had more of those clashes. But yeah, really just highlights the kind of real positive story that Sky exclusive record is. On the demographic side, there was also quite a key positive story that we wanted to share, and that was the fact that this year's Women's 100 had the highest share of female viewing that we've ever seen for the tournament. Important to note here that actually that was a trend that we also saw across the men's 100 tournament. So it was very much a kind of overall 100 trend, but a really positive story nonetheless. That's a kind of really key target audience group that we do regularly monitor, and kind of great to see growth across the board. Similar to what Shalina shared on the Solheim Cup, we've also had a look at the viewer overlap between the men's and the women's 100. So what we found was that of the 5.9 million people that watched 3 minutes of the women's 100 this year, 22% of them only watched that format. So that equated to 1.3 million women's 100 only viewers. So it's quite a similar figure to what Shalina shared earlier for that kind of Solheim Cup, Ryder Cup overlap. And on the right-hand side, we've just looked at who that group is and how that compares to those that watched both and those that just watched the men's 100. And interestingly, the kind of key demographic figure here is that actually the women's 100 only group really skewed quite much more female than the other two. And that was very much the kind of standout variation in terms of the demographics. And then below that, we've just looked at the engagement rate for those three groups. And again, it's a really similar story to what Shalina shared with the golf, whereby the women's 100 only group are a slightly more casual group currently. So you can see their average watch time is around half an hour. That's quite a big decrease compared to the men's 100 only group that are watching for more than an hour. So while it's great that we're able to share that there is this kind of women's only sporting group or audience group, actually both across cricket here and golf, you can see there's a real kind of growth potential in terms of trying to grow their engagement and their kind of affinity with women's sport properties. And sticking with the viewer overlap, we just broke that down by the Sky and BBC coverage just to see if there's any variation in that kind of women's only group by the two different broadcasters. And I think you'd probably expect that there was the women's 100 only rate was higher on BBC than what we saw for Sky. And knowing what we know now about their engagement rate and them being kind of casual viewers, that's kind of what we would expect, kind of more likely to tune in kind of a bit more incidentally on the free-to-air side of things than be watching behind the paywall. So that was certainly no surprise to see that it was more of the BBC side that was driving that women's 100 only group. And finally, on the 100, we just wanted to have a look at a new viewer journey or a kind of transition journey. And Shalina mentioned earlier how successful the Women's Ashes was in terms of the kind of record audiences. So what we wanted to do was have a look at if that, by any chance, was able to, that success of that series kind of brought new people into women's cricket. And then did any of them then go on to watch the kind of domestic product, in this case, the Women's 100. So what we found was that there was 1.7 million people that watched the Ashes, Women's Ashes this year that hadn't watched the 100 last summer. And of that group, just under 300k then went on to watch the Women's 100 this year. So essentially saying that they were perhaps brought into women's cricket by the really successful kind of international Women's Ashes series. And then off the back of that, kind of stuck with it and then decided to go and watch the domestic product, in this case, the Women's 100. And actually just above that, we called out that was a really similar viewer rate to what we saw for the impact of the Commonwealth Games last year when the women's T20 cricket featured for the first time. So a really similar amount of viewers that were perhaps drawn into women's cricket through that and then went on to watch the Women's 100 a bit later. So really just highlights that there is a kind of a bit of an impact here in terms of essentially people being brought into a women's sport or a property through kind of global tournaments on the global stage, and then kind of staying with it and going on to watch the kind of day-to-day domestic product off the back of it, which is, of course, like Tammy mentioned at the start, is very much what we would love to see. Moving on now to look at two World Championship competitions that took place, this year, being the athletics and the gymnastics. So first of all, looking at the athletics World Champs, this is just looking at the top 10 most watched moments on BBC for this competition. And you can see that the top 4 most watched moments were for men's competitions. Generally, when we look at these types of things, what drives audiences is the kind of GB athlete involvement and also kind of medal hopes and contentions, and that was no different here. Actually, what was interesting was the kind of limited gap we saw between the peaks for the men's and the women's 100-meter final. When we've looked at this before, it's been a bit more of a gap, and the men's kind of receiving a higher audience. So that was certainly pleasing to see that actually they were kind of on a par in terms of audiences. And then on the gymnastics World Champs, it's kind of an exact same premise here where we've looked at the top 10 peaks on BBC. It's kind of a slightly different story where it's actually the top 2 most watched moments were for the women's side of things. And certainly a big driver here is definitely the success and the interest around Simone Biles, who of course won the women's all-around final and also heavily contributed to the USA's win in the women's team final. So this really kind of highlights the kind of impact that an individual athlete has clearly had on people wanting to tune in and watch the women's side of this particular competition. Next, we just want to take a really early provisional look at the 2023-24 football season so far. And first of all, looking at some kind of key audience metrics like we usually do for the Barclays Women's Super League after 10 games this year and comparing it to the same stage for the previous 2 years, which of course were both on Sky and BBC as well. And the first thing you might notice here is that the amount of coverage hours that we've had this year is actually quite a bit lower, or a bit of a drop from what we've seen for the previous 2 years. And a big driver for that is that Sky haven't shown any of the coverage so far on the Sky Showcase. So you can see that that's kind of really contributing to that kind of slight decrease in coverage hours. And in turn, that has meant a slight drop as well in viewing hours for the Women's Super League at this stage of the season versus previous. Although another key factor is actually we've had one fewer BBC game this year versus previously, which of course does have an impact on the overall audiences as well. What was promising, however, is actually if you just look at the Sky Sports figure for the viewing hours, that's actually seen the highest that we've seen in the previous years at that kind of 2.6 million. So that's kind of suggesting that there is an element of some of those people that did perhaps watch on Sky Showcase last year have actually been able and they've transitioned to watch on Sky Sports channel without that coverage on the Showcase channel so far. And then sticking with the Barclays Women's Super League, we've just kind of broken down the kind of match-by-match average audience. Very much the standout story here is the kind of really high audience that we saw for the Arsenal-Aston Villa game, with an average audience of just under 750k. And that audience is actually the second most watched Women's Super League match that we've ever seen, only behind the North London derby back last season. And both of those games are really helped by the fact that they aired on BBC One, so really helped to drive that kind of high audiences, but positive story no less. On the Sky side of things, we've seen some really strong numbers as well. So you can see kind of early on, some of the games were getting kind of 200k plus average audience. But then a bit after that, you can see some of the audiences or the particular games did see a bit of a drop from that kind of 200 figure. And a big reason for that is because some of the games have been a bit unfortunate in terms of the premium of the sport clashes that they've had, especially the games that take place on Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening. So we've just called out there that 2 of the games on Sunday evening clashed with live F1, and quite often it airs on Sky Sports F1 and also quite often gets that main event simulcast that I mentioned earlier on the 100 side of things. So that certainly had an impact on those audiences. And then for the Liverpool-Everton game, actually, perhaps even more unfortunate that clashed with the Sunday afternoon Men's Rugby World Cup game between England and Fiji. And of course, that is on free-to-air and had a huge audience. So yeah, there's been a few kind of unfortunate clashes, which has then meant that some of the Sky games later haven't hit the same heights as kind of those games earlier that were hitting the kind of 200k mark. Finally, on football, we've just taken a look at the Lionesses and some of their kind of non-tournament games this year, paying particular attention to the games that have taken place following the Women's World Cup this summer. So you can see that I should say that the Lionesses have played 4 games since then, but we've just called out the Scotland and the Netherlands game here, with the 2 Belgian games not yet available in terms of audiences. But all of them have been part of the Women's Nations League, and you can see that the average audience for the Scotland game hit just over 2 million. So it's really, really strong numbers and quite similar to what we saw for the Women's Finalissima beat Brazil back in April. That then saw a bit of a dip going down to around kind of 500,000 mark for the Netherlands game. And a big driver of that was the switch from airing on ITV1, the kind of primary feed or channel, switching to air on ITV4. And you can see for all the other games this year, that kind of variation really does have quite a big impact on the audiences. So as you'd expect, naturally, the main broadcaster or the main channel for ITV than ITV4, more secondary channel that's kind of lower down in the TV guide. Having said that, though, if you look at the table in the top left, there has been some year-on-year growth for the ITV4 audiences. So comparing kind of 350k average audience last year on that channel, it's been quite a big jump up to 526k this year. So while yes, the audiences are lower on that kind of more secondary channel, it's actually still great to see that there's still kind of the ability to see kind of audience growth on it nonetheless. And finally, we just wanted to give a really quick rugby union update. And here we've just looked at the total video views for the Red Roses 2 games v Canada in the Summer Nations series in September. And this is across both England Rugby's YouTube and Facebook channels. And across the 2 games, we've seen just under 250,000 total online views for the 2 games. So some really, really strong numbers, given that this is a coverage that didn't have any kind of linear or broadcaster coverage. This is very much just the rights holders' social media platforms. But it's great to see that there's still some kind of quite high engagement for these 2 games. So just some key takeaways now. I appreciate we've thrown a lot of information at you, so I just want to leave you with some key kind of bullet points to take away. So first of all, Angelina kind of mentioned at the very start, the kind of highest, we've seen the highest minutes viewed for January to October 22nd this year than any other year, with a 21% increase in minutes viewed per person from last year. On the event-specific side of things, the Solheim Cup this year was the most covered and the most viewed tournament on record, and also became the most viewed women's sport property on pay TV this year. On the cricket side of things, the Women's 100 saw the highest Sky exclusive average audience in 2023 versus the previous 2 years, as well as the highest level of viewing frequency and female share. And that's even though overall those audiences have fallen, like I said, partly because of that lack of evening slot and also because of the rain in August. And then on the international women's cricket side, the England women's team reached the highest amount of linear TV viewers that they ever have this summer, with record engagement levels too. And both women's cricket and golf, as we've kind of explained in the past half an hour, have really dominated the most watched women's sport moments on pay TV so far this year, with the highest peak coming for one of the IT20s that was within the Women's Ashes series. And finally, on the football side of things, Arsenal beat Aston Villa in the Barclays Women's Super League this season is the second most watched match ever for the property, receiving an average audience of just under 750k. And very much finally now, we just wanted to share a projection for where we think women's sport reach is going to end or is going to land by the end of 2023. As you all know, that the majority of the kind of big global women's sports events have already taken place this year, like the Women's World Cup, the Netball World Cup, the Women's Six Nations, kind of England Women's Cricketing Summer. So we've got we know where the reach sits now. We've got a pretty good idea where we think it's going to land by the end of the year. Having said that, that's not to say there's not more great women's sport to come, like the ongoing Barclays Women's Super League. But with all that in mind, we think the 1 minute reach for women's sport this year is going to land at around just under 43 million. And that puts it kind of just below 2022 and also just below 2019. And Ashley mentioned those two are the kind of clear peaks just because of the kind of global football tournaments that they had in Europe. So to even be close to those two, knowing that the Women's World Cup this summer was, of course, in the Southern Hemisphere, is a really impressive feat in itself. So, and really great to see the kind of variation in sports that we've discussed today and previously that are kind of contributing to that projected reach for women's sport this year. That's it from Shalina and I. I'm going to hand back to Tammy.
And thank you very much, Emma and Shalina. Another really comprehensive report coming out. And just to remind you all that we will be sharing both these decks online. I'll pop the link again in once I hand over to Biz. I'm thrilled today also to be having BBC Sport here. So Biz Bond from BBC Sport. We've had them once before share their wave of research into women's sport fandom, and since that time they've been continuing to do this research. So straight over to Biz for an update on what you guys are finding out.
Thanks, Tammy. So good morning, everyone. As Tammy said, we've been running this survey now since 2021 because we realized back then that basically we knew a lot about women's sports, men's sports audiences, but not that much about those that come just for women's sports. So really wanted to get to know those habits a bit better. And the latest wave of that research debriefed last month, and that's what I'm going to chat you through in the next sort of 15 minutes or so. So to begin, some background. At BBC Sport, we're on a mission to grow the sports fan in everyone, which means having commitment to sport beyond the mainstream. And so, yeah, as I said, we realised that we knew a lot about sports audiences, but not those coming specifically for women's sport. So we wanted to maximise BBC's coverage of women's sport in a way that would engage these specific fans and really meet their needs. So on the slide here, you can see some of the competitions that we've covered in the last 15 years or so. And as the UK's most popular sports broadcaster, it's impossible to overstate the impact that we can have in helping drive change and bring women's sport to the forefront of everyone's minds. Broadcast remains the most powerful catalyst for growth and change. So here you can also see some of our marketing strategies, which began with the hashtag Change the Game campaign, which aims to change perceptions, bring women's sport to the mainstream. We followed that with the We Know Our Place campaign, cementing the normalization of women's sport and deepening fandom. And we're now hoping to maintain momentum, build on the success of competitions such as the Women's World Cup, for which we saw an audience of 22.6 million tune in for our coverage. Because big competitions represent a really great opportunity to champion women's sport. Looking at iPlayer data, we've seen an uplift of double the number of monthly accounts watching women's sport on average this year in comparison to 2021. But when you exclude big football competitions such as the Euros and Women's World Cup, the average number of accounts has stayed consistent within about 5% of what it was each month in 2021, which in itself says something about the habits around women's sport. And so we began this survey in October 2021 to begin to get a sense of these habits, to quantify how many people were identifying as fan and to what degree. And we've rerun this survey in August of last year and October of this year. And the results are showing that interest is definitely growing. But before we get into the specifics of it, it might be useful to know what we asked. So we asked how respondents would describe their level of interest in women's sport. We then asked them to tell us their level of interest in a selection of sports, those listed on the screen there. And finally, for the sports they said they were interested in, we asked how long they'd been following them. Then, following the Euros last year, we added in some follow-up questions for people who told us they were interested in women's football. We asked whether they intended to follow Barclays Women's Super League, how they intended to follow, and whether they had a team to support. And as a further addition this year, we included a question around broadcasters in the box there, in a hope to gauge whether more could be done to bring awareness to the BBC's involvement in women's sport, particularly football. And finally, just a note on the how before we jump in. So back in October 2021, when we did the first round, we had reports with market size interest in women's sport, but we saw a gap in understanding the depth of fandom and how that mapped to different sports. So we wanted to run something a bit more specific. So when asking people about their level of interest, we presented them with these classifications: big fan, casual follower, big eventer, not yet a fan, non-fan, and don't know. These broadly align to how we internally at the BBC think about the needs of different types of audiences, but it added a couple of things in. Firstly, we added 2 options for people who felt they didn't identify as a fan currently, because there's a big difference for us in people who are really not interested and closed off versus those people that just aren't interested in it yet, but are open to it. The second thing to note is the descriptions of each of the options. In the past, we've often grouped fans by their behaviours. For instance, they look for sport updates hourly, daily, infrequently. But being a fan is not just about media behaviours, it's about the emotional connection to how they feel. So we wrote these with a mixture of behaviour and feeling to help make it easier for fans to self-select. And in the first run, we noted that we got a much higher number of fans than we'd seen in other reports. For example, YouGov ran a report a few months earlier than our first wave in 2021, which asked if people follow women's sport, and only 6.6 million said yes. But when we offered these richer descriptions just a couple of months later, we had an audience of 18.8 million. Sorry, I just skipped ahead there. So we wrote these, pardon me. So back then we thought this could be a reflection of the coolness in temperature to women's sport. People will follow it, but aren't identifying as an avid fan. And so that's something that we wanted to build on. So what we're all here for, the results. And let's start with the growth. The first question in our survey asked people which, if any, of the following best describes your level of interest in women's sport. And you can see those results in the lighter red for October 2021, the darker red for August 22, and that most recent wave in purple. And it's a lovely clear graphic showing that the number of people identifying as a fan of women's sport is consistently rising. We've seen a rise of 4 million since last year and 7.8 million since we started the survey. It is interesting to see the fall of 0.2 million in the big fan category. It might be that the last wave was benefiting from the Euros hype because the wave was completed just after we'd won compared to this year's loss at the Women's World Cup. However, it does raise an editorial question for us at the BBC that although people are becoming more interested in women's sport, more could perhaps be done to engender a habit amongst our audience and get them invested as passionate fans. Following that line of opportunity, where else is that opportunity? So the opportunity group continues to become smaller, as it's likely they're converting to more casual fans, but still there are 13.3 million UK adults who are open to women's sport. So as a reminder, the descriptor here was, I'm not yet a fan. Women's sport isn't something I'm interested in. I wouldn't call myself a fan, but I'm open to the idea of it, which begs the question, how could we win these audiences round to committing to women's sport? It's also worth pointing out that the non-fans are consistently decreasing, along with those who don't know, which suggests that there's more of a stance of women's sport in general, perhaps off the back of the recent big events, bringing it more to the mainstream. But the main takeaway from this first question is that when you consider those that are identifying as fans, as well as those who are open to it, you're talking about 63% of the population, equivalent to about 40 million people, which is hard evidence of the upward trend in interest in women's sport, and a great case to make to continue champions women's sport for us at the BBC, as it means to provide value for a good proportion of the UK. Now we can look at the breakdown of those fan types by individual sports. So just above the chart is the total number of fans, i.e. those identifying as a big fan, casual follower, or main eventer. And I've highlighted those that have seen changes of more than 1 million in comparison to the last wave, with red denoting a drop and green a rise. So one big change is that football has now overtaken athletics as the biggest women's sport and has the most consistent fan base with 14 million casual or big fans. So that's the red and orange bar combined on the left there. Ahead of tennis at 13 million. Last year, tennis and football were neck and neck, but 1 million football fans have shifted from main eventers to casual fans in this wave. Cricket's also seen a growth of 2 million, and it's made up mostly of new main eventers, with some shift from main eventers to casual fans in comparison to the last wave. The Ashes series, as well as continued success of the 100, is likely at play here. But the overall view is that there have been drops in other cycling, combat sports, and uplifts in football, cricket, and rugby, which gives further evidence of the power of competitions, as each of these sports that have seen that big uplift have had big competitions in the last year. So it'll be interesting to see if these new fans develop a habit. Speaking of habits, we've been tracking how long people have been following women's sport. So here you have the length of fandom for those interested in each of those sports. As per our findings from the first report, we see the trend of more established sports like tennis, athletics, gymnastics, wind sports, and cycling, with more secure fan bases of more than 7 years. But compare that to sports like football, we have more new fans. Football, for instance, has 11.5 million fans who've been following for less than 2 years, which is useful for us when thinking about the types of coverage we might need to best meet audience needs. It's also really exciting to see that some of the biggest women's sports, so if you think back to the previous slide where the biggest by population were rugby, football, and cricket, are all fairly new sports fans, which stays true to our aim here at the BBC to find the sports fan in everyone. What's clear from this graph, though, is that for many of the women's sports, main eventers continue to be a big identification for fans. What more could we do to shift those that sort of dip in and have less of a habit to develop a more consistent habit? As such, I took a wee deep dive into women's football to try to understand the evolution of fandom. So women's football fandom has grown by 10 million since we first started the tracker, with 25 million now considering themselves a fan. And you can see how we're shifting people across to the left of this graph. We've now got triple the number of big fans from 1 to 3 million, 3 million more casual follows, and 3 million more main eventers. As I've alluded to, it's likely we're seeing the impact of big competitions such as the Euros and World Cup here, bringing the sport to the attention of those who perhaps hadn't engaged with it before. But it's also interesting to note that I'm a big fan is sort of shallowing off. It's consistent at 3 million. So again, there's that question around habit. What is it about that identification as a big fan that people just aren't really clinging to at the minute? Yeah. Following on from that, we included a few extra questions on football to help us think about our Barclays Women's Super League coverage. So out of the people who said they had an interest in football, 42% intended to follow the Women's Super League. That's 5% higher than August of last year. Then looking at how the audiences plan to engage, the proportional makeup of how people intended to follow Women's Super League this season was consistent across the board with last year, with the exception of watching on telly, which saw a growth of 4 percentage points. So nearly 2/3 of the audience expect to watch it on TV. Again, this could be a result of big competitions in very recent history, encouraging audiences to see women's football as an appointment to watch, which gives a challenge to maintain this interest and focus and sort of think about how we can maximize our Women's Super League offering and continue to promote women's football as a television appointment for the whole family to get around. Another challenge is around the more casual nature of women's football fandom. No, only 6% plan to follow closely on that left-hand side graph, but a third intend to do so in some capacity. And I would contend that this is matched by people's anticipated methods of engagement. nearly 2/5 of respondents anticipate catching up with highlights or social media. So it leads to an editorial question for us at the BBC of how we can maximise our more on-the-go casual offering for the Women's Super League. Is the app the place to engage with these fans using clips and quick fixes of information? And then finally, we asked if these fans followed a Women's Super League team. Within that, 30% said not yet, which is 5 percentage points up on last year. And again, gives us an opportunity to think about how we can help fans pick a team. Consistent with the last wave, there's nearly 2/5 that don't support a team. So almost 70% of our audience, marked by the box there, don't have all their eggs in one team's basket, as it were. So how might we make it easy for them to follow or choose? Conversely, could this be a reflection of how fandom might be different or might evolve? It might be that women's football fandom takes on a slightly different flavour than the behaviours we see for men's. For instance, as a nascent sport, we saw earlier that lots of these fans are new. There's less occurrence of inherited fandom, the I support this team because my dad does approach. We've also seen some evidence recently of younger fans following individual players more closely than teams in the new age of digital fandom. So it's something for us to think about and how our content strategy might need to adapt and engage with new habits we're seeing. And then finally, we added a new question to gauge awareness of the BBC's women football offering. And we're relieved to find that BBC remains top of mind as the place to watch, with half of the audience thinking of the BBC as somewhere to watch live women's football, closely followed by Sky Sports at 47%. It's interesting to note that many of the quoted broadcasters don't show Women's Super League. Only BBC, Sky and FA Player do in the UK. So it could be that the ITV coverage of the Women's World Cup has cemented it in the audience's mind as a place to watch women's football. But still, nearly a quarter, so 23% of respondents didn't know at all where they might watch Barclays Women's Super League. So how could we do more to promote the competition, and in particular that it's broadcast free to air on the BBC? So finally, in summary, key takeaways for you today: fandom's growing, it's deepening, and we're in a great position to think about that 13 million who don't yet identify as a fan, combining learnings from this investigation and other research to cater to the emergent behaviours. Plus, you know, with a great sporting calendar, the Olympics next year, as well as the regular seasons of women's sport, definitely in a strong position to engage new and existing fans. And I'd say if this year was about thriving, we certainly met the brief. Now just to nourish and encourage those budding fandoms. So thank you everyone for listening.
It's amazing. Thank you very much, Biz, and thank you, BBC Sport, for sharing it with all of us this morning. I think these two reports somewhat echo each other. So I want to go to Emma and Shalina, and so I'm always interested to know what researchers think of other people's research. So what are you struck by, Emma, when you hear Biz talk?
Yeah, I think first of all, thank you very much, because that was very interesting. And like you say, Tammy, there's a lot of parallels with what Shalina and I went through earlier. And well, very first of all, I think it's great to see that kind of women's sport fan base is growing. I think the thing that really stood out for me that really did echo what we'd shared previously was the kind of great that there's that increase in kind of casual and main event fans. And that's kind of reflected in what Shalina and I went through, especially on the cricket and golf side of things. But I think what our research really highlighted for those is there's real growth to be had in terms of making them a kind of more engaged viewer and a more engaged audience that are tuning in more regularly. And Biz, your point around, is it that those particular groups might not be watching the traditional ways like on live TV, and they need to be accessed in different ways like kind of online clips or short form clips? I think I don't necessarily have the answer, but I think that kind of conversation is a really interesting one to see how it a kind of different trend or a different approach that is needed for that particular group of people to really help grow them and make them those kind of big fans, which of course is what we want more of. And then I think secondly, a really interesting point was around your the Barclays Women's Super League example, and the sheer amount of people that are watching and engage with it but that don't have a team. And I think, like you say, it whether that is a question of there's a real growth opportunity there to grow their fandom through kind of team fandom and kind of helping them choose a team in whatever way that is, or like you mentioned in research we've done, where is it that kind of especially younger audiences and younger fans actually are less bothered about the team, and you know, are they just following Sam Kerr and wherever she goes, and it's kind of a case of driving that type of fandom. So yeah, really, really interesting. And I don't necessarily have all the answers on that, but it definitely helps Shalina and I kind of continue with our analysis and go away and look at more and more things as we keep doing this work.
Thanks, Emma. I'm noticing a few questions popping up, and I'm loving these questions. It's sort of, we're starting to ask stuff that we haven't asked previously, and it's sort of every time it's sort of people want to get to another layer of depth around this. It's fantastic to see. Biz, since I've got Emma to talk about your research, I feel like I need to give you the opportunity to do the same.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Emma said. That sort of more casual nature of fandom is really interesting. The part of your presentation that I really loved was that the sort of 100 only audience for the women's game or the Solheim Cup who didn't listen to watch the Riders' Cup. And when you've broken it down into demographics, it's sort of skewed slightly more female, which I think I'd be really interested to look into whether there's a relationship between people's gender and how much they engage, whether maybe women aren't used to finding the time to put aside for an hour's game and take it out of their day to watch or properly engage, and maybe it's more of the expectation and what their routines look like, that it's not as accepted perhaps, and how we can maybe engender and encourage that to become the norm. You know, I sort of reference point of one, you know, growing up it was very normal for my dad to sit down and watch 2 games of football back to back. I don't think I saw my mum ever engage in a habit like that. So yeah, that was really interesting to me, and I probably will go away and look into some of the demographics of our own data and habits of watching off the back of that. So thank you.
Thanks, Biz. I'm very aware we're fast approaching time. I think that there's still a lot of work to do around habit and around fandom. And progress is never linear, and what the industry is doing is actually learning about this new market. There's clearly lots of things that we need to get better at. Signposting so people know where and when to find coverage. Scheduling is a huge challenge. Broadcasters and rights holders need the chance to be able to test things and learn. And we all need to get a deeper understanding of where and how women's sport audiences want to consume content. So look forward to learning all of that and more with all of you as this whole industry progresses. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this morning. So please encourage your colleagues to head to the Women's Sport Trust website to download both reports. But once all cyberspaces does its thing, we'll get a video of this to you via Eventbrite, as I said previously. And thanks to all of you for joining us, and particularly Emma, Shalina and Biz for some wonderful insight and fantastic contributions. So thank you all and have a great morning.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.